Barcelona didn't just win La Liga at the Bernabéu. They triggered a nuclear protocol that Florentino Perez has kept locked in a drawer for 13 years. Picture the exact moment the final whistle blew on that 2-0 defeat. The away sector of the Santiago Bernabéu erupted into a sea of Blaugrana, celebrating a back-to-back La Liga title on the sacred turf of their fiercest, most hated rivals. It is the ultimate humiliation in Spanish football. But if you looked closely at the pitch, you didn't see a Real Madrid team devastated by the loss. You didn't see players falling to their knees in agony, tearing at their shirts. You saw something much worse. You saw players who looked entirely disconnected from each other. They looked hollow. And high up in the presidential VIP box, gazing down at the wreckage of a billion-euro sporting project, Florentino Perez wasn't watching the Barcelona celebration. He had already seen enough. This 2-0 defeat wasn't an anomaly. It was merely the inevitable conclusion to a catastrophic 9 months. A second consecutive season, entirely devoid of major silverware for a club that considers winning a divine, non-negotiable right. Think about what we have witnessed this year. We saw a humiliating, almost inexplicable exit from the Copa del Rey at the hands of Albacete, a second-division side that somehow managed to make the supposed kings of Europe look tactically clueless, physically exhausted, and mentally absent. We watched Xabi Alonso, the undisputed golden boy of modern coaching, arrive with a brilliant master plan, only to be brutally sacked by January. The dressing room didn't just reject his ideas. They swallowed him whole. And now, under the interim guidance of Álvaro Arbeloa, we are watching the final, agonizing embers of this specific squad burn out. Right now, if you turn on the TV or open any social media feed, every major sports outlet, every pundit, and every tactical blog is doing the exact same thing. They are furiously dissecting Álvaro Arbeloa's touchline decisions. They are pulling up heat maps and passing networks to show how the midfield spacing was completely broken against Barcelona. They are criticizing the high defensive line, pointing out the lack of tracking back from the superstar forwards, and counting the expected goals, XG, and defensive errors. They are treating this as a crisis of formations and personnel. But nobody is talking about what is actually happening behind those closed doors. The media is desperately trying to frame this as a footballing problem. They want to believe that Real Madrid just needs a better system, a new modern philosophy, or a few expensive tweaks in the upcoming summer transfer window. That is not a tactical failure. That is an institutional collapse. What is happening right now in the Spanish capital has absolutely nothing to do with football. It has everything to do with ego, untethered power, and a dressing room that has become completely, fundamentally unmanageable. When Álvaro Arbeloa stood in absolute silence on the touchline after the second Barcelona goal went in, he did not look like a manager trying to solve a complex puzzle. He looked like a hostage. He looked like a man who fully realizes that the authority of the head coach at Real Madrid currently means absolutely nothing. The players know it. The fans whistling their own superstars from the stands know it. But most importantly, the hierarchy knows it. This is the exact reason why the board's emergency meetings over the past 48 hours haven't been about finding the next great tactical visionary. They are not dialing Jurgen Klopp's number to beg him out of his sabbatical. They are not looking at Mauricio Pochettino or Didier Deschamps to build a cohesive, long-term project. They have realized that this current crop of superstars cannot be managed by a traditional coach. Instead, the reports leaking out of Madrid suggest Perez is looking towards Portugal. He is looking at a man currently managing Benfica, a man whose previous exit from the Bernabéu 13 years ago left the club completely fractured, exhausted, and at war with itself. Jose Mourinho. If you are sitting there thinking that Florentino Perez wants to bring Mourinho back to play beautiful, expansive football and tactically outsmart Pep Guardiola, you are entirely missing the point. You don't bring Mourinho into a dressing room like this to win the possession stats. You bring him in to press the red button. The real reason Mourinho is the top candidate is something no one at the club wants to say out loud. And it is absolutely terrifying. To understand why Florentino Perez is ready to trigger the nuclear option, you have to rewind exactly 1 year. Back to the final days of Carlo Ancelotti's reign, long before the Albacete humiliation, long before Xabi Alonso was chewed up and spat out by this squad. There was a quiet, almost suffocating whisper leaking out of Ancelotti's backroom staff. A single quote that made its way into the Spanish press, heavily downplayed at the time but carrying the weight of a death sentence for the club's immediate future. The staff warned that the collective ego of this specific group of players had reached a critical mass. They called the squad, quite literally, unmanageable. Unmanageable. That is not a minor dressing room leak complaining about training methods. That is a prophecy. When a coaching staff at Real Madrid uses that word, they are not talking about tactical disobedience. They are talking about a total collapse of professional respect. And if you want to see what unmanageable looks like in practice, you don't look at the expected goals against Barcelona. You look at what happened exactly 24 hours before that match. The club was forced to issue an unprecedented, combined €1 million fine to Federico Valverde and Aurelien Tchouameni. Let that sink in. €1 million. This wasn't a minor disagreement over a misplaced pass in a rondo. This was a physical altercation in the sanctity of the dressing room between the two men who were supposed to inherit the midfield legacy of Toni Kroos and Luka Modric. You have to understand the gravity of that. A club like Real Madrid does everything in its formidable power to keep internal discipline quiet. They will leak tactical injuries. They will feed the press transfer rumors. But they protect the illusion of the brotherhood at all costs. For a €1 million fine to not only be levied but to become public knowledge, the internal mechanisms of control must be completely shattered. The engine room of the future was tearing itself apart on the eve of the biggest match of the season. And the club couldn't even hide it. And it doesn't stop there. Just days prior, the Spanish media caught wind of a massive, explosive bust-up on the training ground between Antonio Rudiger and Kylian Mbappe, the enforcer of the old guard clashing with the ultimate, untouchable Galactico. There is a generous reading of these events. The generous reading is that this is simply the natural friction of elite athletes operating under immense pressure. That it is a sign of passion, a desperate desire to win manifesting as aggression. The less generous reading and the absolute reality is that there is zero authority left in that building. The players are not fighting for the badge. They are fighting for hierarchy. They are establishing their own internal power structures because the vacuum left by the managerial instability is so vast. It has consumed the entire squad. This is the reality Alvaro Arbeloa inherited. When he stood frozen on the touchline, as Barcelona celebrated their title, he wasn't thinking about how to fix the high press. He was standing there as a man who knows he is utterly powerless. Arbeloa is not a head coach right now. He is a substitute teacher in a classroom full of billionaire egos who already know his contract is essentially void. The dressing room has realized that the manager cannot punish them, cannot drop them, and cannot control them. They don't need a tactical visionary anymore. They need a warden. If you want to truly understand how deep this rot goes, you have to look away from the pitch entirely. You have to look at a story that leaked out over the past few weeks. A story that the Spanish press largely treated as a bizarre, almost comical blunder. Pundits laughed about it on late-night television. Rivals used it as a punchline. But in the context of what we now know about the internal power dynamics of this squad, it is actually the most chilling detail of the entire season. Kylian Mbappe, the crown jewel of Florentino Perez's modern empire, the man whose arrival was supposed to define a decade of dominance, goes into the club's elite medical facility for a crucial MRI on a suspected knee injury. The medical staff, highly paid, world-class professionals tasked with protecting the physical well-being of a €1 billion sporting project, put him in the machine, and they scanned the wrong leg. Now, the generous reading of this situation is that it was simply a staggering moment of human error, a bad day at the office, a mix-up in the paperwork, an unfortunate accident. The less generous reading and the absolute, undeniable reality is that this incident exposes the ultimate, fatal breakdown of communication, respect, and basic functionality within the club. I want you to really think about the mechanics of how an error like that actually happens. How does a world-class medical team scan the wrong leg of the most famous athlete on the planet? They do it when the player walks into the room, isolates himself, and operates with an air of untouchable detachment. They do it when the medical professionals are so terrified of the superstar's aura, so hyper-anxious about the toxic, pressurized atmosphere currently permeating the Valdebebas training ground, that they cannot even perform standard intake protocols. The doctors and physios are working in a state of absolute panic, second-guessing themselves because the environment dictates that any interaction with the highest-paid players is a political landmine. That is not a medical error. That is institutional paralysis. It proves that the players do not respect the staff is terrified of the players.